Welcome to this ILIG Informal meeting, and our speaker this evening is the President of CILIP, no less, Judy Broady-Preston, and she is going to speak about professionalism and identity. And Judy, as I say, she's president of CILIP in this most momentous and challenging year. But even at the best of times, professionalism and professional identity are questions for librarianship that never seem to stay still. Librarians continue to talk about them. And whoop, what have I done? Yeah, and so the thoughts of the president of the professional body on this topic are obviously worth listening to. And so, Judy, we are all ears and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Oh, I should have said, yes, before I hand over, that's a point I made in the letter to you, in the letter to everyone. This meeting is being recorded. If that is a problem for you, the solution is to turn off your camera. But I don't think I have any other parenthetical observations. So, Judy, it is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aidan. Now, what I need to do first of all, before I start to speak to you all, is to see if I can get this to work. I'm not as, wait a minute. Yes, I think I can. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, just a moment. Right, I want to do that from the beginning. Now, you should be able to see a PowerPoint slide. Could you just confirm, Aidan, that you can? Right.
Yes, yes,
thank you.
I can.
Yes. I realise this doesn't sound terribly prepossessing from the president of CILIP, but as I explained to Aidan a few moments ago, I'm more used to using Blackboard and Teams, and this is my first run through of presenting using a PowerPoint on a Zoom. So thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you also for the invitation. I think it certainly has been a momentous year, and you would all be forgiven completely for not remembering that professionalism, identity, and leadership are in fact my presidential themes for this year. I had a discussion only yesterday with Nick Poole in which I said, do you think I ought to offer a prize for the person who actually remembers what the presidential theme for 2020 is? It has really rather been overtaken by events, but as Aidan suggests, it is nonetheless of critical and crucial importance, even more so now. Global perspectives on everything that we do are so significant. So what I'm going to do this evening very quickly is to give some context and background, to run through identity and roles, the influence and impact of culture, concepts of professionals and professionalism, detail what I think we mean by the emergent profession, and address very quickly ideas of leadership within the context of the pandemic. As you will see, that's quite an order for such a short presentation. So hopefully we'll get through some of the ideas. I want to start first of all by looking at identity. We all have multiple identities and roles. One of the reasons that I'm so pleased to speak to you all and to give a global perspective is that I've had a very international identity and role throughout my career. I've worked and delivered lectures throughout the world and worked very closely, not only my role as a member of an IFLA committee, and as CILIP president, but also in my day job, as it were, as an academic, I have worked extensively with colleagues all over the world. But we all have multiple identities and roles. We can all categorize ourselves in various different ways. And these roles are not something that we move seamlessly from one to the other, but we also hold them simultaneously. We are librarians, we are partners, we are parents sometimes, we are children. And all of these identities and roles give us our perceptions of self. And there is a theory called self-categorization theory, which essentially means that we are differing things to differing people. And it's quite important to us as human beings, a sense of self and the need to belong. And if we look at our need for belonging, we can identify tribes and groups and families and social, religious and cultural tribes, groups and families to which we belong. And we behave differently in our different selves and our different settings, so that our roles, identities and behaviours are not fixed, they're sort of fluctuating states. And to each of those, we have a sense of loyalty. And we may actually experience some kind of conflict of loyalties. That's a great demand on us as individuals. So there is a description of how we should behave in certain ways, or how we could behave in certain ways, with something described as position practice. And that's a sort of theoretical construct that says, for every position people hold, there are a set of behaviours and expectations of behaviours in roles. So that if you're the chief executive of an organisation, there is an expectation that you will behave in a certain way, that there are certain practices that go with that position. Because one of the criticisms that there has been of President Trump, for example, is that a lot of his behaviours have not conformed to expectations of presidential behaviour. I'm not going to come to a judgment on that score, but just identify that that has been a criticism. And similarly, there are members of the royal family at the moment, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, who have been criticised because they are attempting to redefine the position practice for a member of the extended royal family. Okay, so I had a sort of slide which is just showing one of the ideas that gives a criticism of President Trump. And you will see with the girl, the little girl, he's presenting something and he's smiling, but she is correctly masked and he is not. And they're certainly not observing social distancing at the moment. So what I'd like to do is just explore some of the theories and theoretical frameworks we can use to make sense of identity and understand it, because it's so central to our well-being and our sense of ourselves. So there is something called social identity theory, which I've used myself and other commentators have used in conjunction with other theories, or indeed individually. And Jenkins, I think, has described it very well. Jenkins hasn't identified it or defined it or originated it, but he does describe it very well. This is our understanding of who we are and of who other people are, and reciprocally, other people's understanding of themselves and of others, which includes us. So it gives us a framework for that understanding. And as you will see, that I also made the observation that professional identity, which is relevant to us is one of a range of social identities held by us. And included with that is that we do have a social dimension to ourselves as a professional group. This is really a social gathering as well as a professional gathering, I hope. And I'm looking forward to a more informal discussion when I've finished presenting to you all. But as you can imagine, there are possibly potential tensions between what's called the collective level of the profession and the individual level of the professional. In other words, there may be a tension between what is good for the profession as a whole and the experiences and the needs of the individual professional. And that the individual professional may also have loyalty to their work group, their work team, as well as their professional loyalty. They could also have wider loyalties, which may also come into conflict. And I'll perhaps come back to that, if I may, a little later. And surrounding all of that is the importance of culture, which gives us a context. So I'll move quickly to just a few ideas about culture, because we do have, as Rousseau said, a critical desire to identify with the social system of which we are a part, this need to belong. And that if we look at the cultural influences and the areas of belonging, we have our professional one, we have national cultural influences, and I'm including family and religion in those, and organisational culture. And the interrelationship of those three major cultural influences has an impact on the perceptions of our professional behaviours and standards. And I'm giving some examples. I've done quite a lot of work in Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, whilst there is a very strong work and professional ethic, there is also, nonetheless, a strong sense of family loyalty. And that is equally true in the Middle East. So much so that it is not perceived to be unprofessional to put family demands before attending a professional event. Now, it's understanding globally that need for a different set of lenses. We tend to make judgments, I feel, or there is a tendency for us to make judgments through the prism of a Western cultural lens. That we have our views of what it is to be professional and how professionals should behave. And we suggest that if people do not put that as of primary importance, that means in some way they may be behaving unprofessionally. And I think we need to understand and absorb the fact that one can have equally strong loyalties without becoming unprofessional or being viewed as unprofessional. Similarly, there are views about the role of women and other groupings in a cultural perspective. The link I've put on the slide here, which I'm happy to share with you, Women in Cultural Leadership, is a discussion that was held in Qatar between academics and leaders in the cultural sector. Now, in Qatar, which is quite has a strong national religious culture, there might be an outside or an external perception that women are not in leadership roles. In actual fact, in the cultural sector, women are very strongly in leadership roles, regardless of the national culture. And there was a very interesting discussion, which is free to see, which was held in Qatar National Library earlier this year. Or actually, sorry, I think it was late last year. Still feels like 2019 as we come to grips with 2020. And similarly, working restrictions. We need to embrace the idea that people who have loyalty to religious beliefs, that mean that they cannot be available to work on certain holy days, is something that shouldn't mean that we are judging their professional behavior and their professional standard. So this idea of conflict is quite strong, that there can be organizational versus professional conflict. We have a loyalty as employees very often to an organization, as well as a loyalty to a profession. And they could, and often do, come into conflict. There can be the loyalty of the individual professional to their profession versus their loyalty to their team. And their team can be made up of different professionals, each of whom bring their own set of professional loyalties to their team working environment. So the idea that we all have to decide is, where does our primary allegiance lie, and how can we allow for that to differ between individuals? And there is, again, another theoretical concept, the idea of fit, that what we look for as individuals are settings and scenarios where our values and the culture match up in some way. So taking this to the information profession, the information profession has been described as an emergent professions. And I like particularly this quote from Jarson from 5 years ago that describes librarians as translators. We are translators of experience, and our unique position offers us opportunities to bridge divides of perspectives and disciplines and stakeholders. Because we could argue that there has been quite a tectonic shift in our perception of what it is to be a librarian and information professional, that there are different ways now and different roles expected of information professionals, so much so that we can be categorized in so many different ways. And CILIP did a very useful listing, which you can see, that says, well, we can be data scientists, we can be archivists, we can be all kinds of different things, which means that we have a danger of having a fractured professional identity, which may lead to fragmentation. If we look at these very narrow niche definitions of who and what we are, we may then become too small to survive and thrive. And that what is useful is to think of CILIP as a unifying entity, bringing together archivists, librarians, knowledge managers, information managers, data scientists, public librarians, however we categorize ourselves as professionals, that CILIP is there as a unifying force for us. And I like this quote from Nick, a speech he made last year to another Members' Day, that professionalism is nothing without critical reflection, that we should be thinking critically about what it means to be a professional. And his idea that professionalism is open and inclusive, that you are what makes you a professional, your skills and ethics and commitment, not your employment contract. And that we want to see everybody included in the idea of a profession, whatever their seniority or identity. And in many ways, Nick's views resonate with accepted themes and theories and models, because traditionally, professionalization was seen as a process. And this kind of rather lengthy quote that I've copied from something I wrote quite a long time ago is really what a traditional view of a professional and professionalization as a process is. that we attempt to create and control a market for professional expertise, and we achieve it through control over expert knowledge via delineation of a body of professional knowledge, which differentiates ourselves from other occupational groups. That's a traditional view of what it is to be a professional. And I think if we're to understand it, we need to explore it from different concepts. So there is the need to explore and different perspectives, and need to explore it from a collective perspective. Is there something as an information profession that brings us together that we can agree is what we share in common? And then we need to think about ourselves as individuals, what it means to us as an individual to be an individual information professional, and how we allow for evolution and change. We don't want to put a straitjacket on what we're doing, and how we allow for position practice, how we define roles and expectations and behaviours, and we come to some idea of ethics and standards, because we need to think about ethical practice and standards of behaviour. So that I'm sure you're all now familiar with the definitions of professionalism that followed the process that was initiated in 2019. There was a consultation event, and as a result of which there was a series of definitions, and all of these definitions are supported by ideals and an outline of how CILIP can support and contribute to each of those. So what we're trying to do is provide a safe space, as it were, and the means by which everybody can develop professional skills, signal a commitment to a shared idea of the profession, and demonstrate professionalism to others, and also to enter into partnership with others and share the network. And this is really a starting point for our discussions and member input. This is a start of a conversation, which I think is going to go across Paul's term of office next year, as he looks to extend membership within the information and knowledge management community. But it's also important in looking ahead. This representation of the ages of people is something that draws on research done by Amanda Spink and her team, that where we are currently is somewhere at the edge of the information age, where what we're drawing on is intellectual capital. But we're going to be moving into the consciousness age, where it's cultural capital that's going to be so important. So we need to think about who is going to lead us into the future, how we are led into a new view and a new way of thinking about the profession and professionalism. And this slide is looking at what I've categorized as future-facing leadership, that we start from the perspective of values, yes, that we have a series of standards, principles, or beliefs which help us decide what is right or wrong, and what informs our standards of behavior, which leads us to identify attributes which are personal qualities which contribute to our being effective leaders, which we can then categorize as competencies, which are professional capabilities and skills. And all of these can be learned and developed and practiced. So we're getting rid of the idea that leaders are born, not made, that we can learn it, we can develop it, and we can practice it, so that we can actually come up with a set of skills, attributes, and behaviors that come into 4 core areas: knowing yourself, building relationships, embracing change and innovation, and being responsible. And if we accept this as a sort of framework, none of this is position related. None of this says you have to be a chief executive, you have to be a senior librarian. You can be a leader within a profession to at whatever level you are practicing at. And that it's arguable that the only way as a profession we are going to grow is if we are all going to take responsibility and ownership of leading into, you know, into the next phase and time. So if we look at what is a leadership for our times, again, a global perspective. There was a very interesting piece by BBC reporters that suggested that the current New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, made an excellent crisis leader from her leadership of the country following the horrific events and the massacre at the mosques in Wellington, that she exhibited the correct, her response to that series of utterly tragic events embodied and encompassed the kind of leadership qualities that made New Zealand admired and envied, no doubt, throughout the world. And similarly, at the beginning of the pandemic, the South Korean president was categorized as an inspired communicator because he constantly communicated to the South Korean people a complete sense of purpose and identity and knowledge of what was happening as the pandemic unfolded. Possibly his categorization may be slightly amended due to later events, but at the time of writing for this BBC team, he was certainly someone that you could categorize as an inspired communicator. And what we're now beginning to see are leadership models being developed for what is called the post-COVID-19 workplace. I'm not sure we're navigating the COVID-19 workplace necessarily adequately currently, or we have a shared sense of perspective or consensus on that. But nonetheless, Forbes in the US have come up with these 7 leadership traits for the post-COVID-19 workforce. Candor, which is honesty without ambiguity, which I found quite an interesting categorization. It doesn't mean what I took candor to mean, which is more of a dictionary definition, but honesty without ambiguity, not open to differing interpretations. But I think these kind of 7 traits take us back in some ways to the old idea that we have certain traits for leaders, and unless you are exhibiting all of these all of the time, you're not being an effective leader. And I think possibly that's something that we may need to reflect upon, is what I would suggest. But I'm conscious now that I've spoken for half an hour, just about, more or less, and I think that's about as much as I was asked to speak, because I'm aware it's an informal event with a lot of you present. So thank you very much, Diolch yn fawr, and I think over to you, Aidan. I'm certainly welcome comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. Yes, that was very interesting. Questions, the best way to put those, everyone, you'll see at the bottom of the screen, you should see the chat button. Click on that and type your questions in the space that will emerge, and they'll stack up, and I can pass them on. Just to be going on with Judy, would you be prepared to name any examples of good leadership within the professional or outside it that you oh dear, sorry.
I was just going to say that that's one of those awful questions, isn't it? You know, it's ooh. I think the issue is for all of us that we're all human, and therefore the problem about the human state is that we're all fallible. We have the constraint of fallibility, shall we say, and that I don't think anyone is ever an excellent leader all of the time. I think the point is that people move in and out, and that you can categorize certain behaviors as excellent leadership, perhaps culturally, contextually dependent, or in response, for example, like Jacinda Ardern, her response to a specific crisis was an exemplar of good leadership. Now, I have friends and colleagues in New Zealand, and they said, well, yes, she's very good, but she's not good all the time, you know. So I think probably long-winded way of saying, sorry, Aidan, that I think that probably holds true across the board, across professions as well as countries and cultures. I've got a question here from, sorry, you just come up as Field, which sounds more like a last name than a first name. If you wanted to share your first name, I wouldn't want to refer to you as Field, but the question is, would you, everybody can see it, I hope, would you say that the Forbes stuff are really skills rather than qualities you need all the time? Yes, I think it's one of those things, you look at them and it looks to be the paragon of all the virtues, is what I call it. You know, you look at these kind of lists of things that you're supposed to be and do, and most of us hold up our hands and say, oh, well, yes, wonderful, but that doesn't look like me, and I could never look like that all the time. And I think the problem with things like that is that they stop people embracing attempts at being excellent leaders, because they look at all of that and think, oh, well, it's just too much, I couldn't possibly do that. So yes, and yes, I mean, things like managing a hybrid team is certainly a skill, and you can definitely lose it. And humility, I think, is one of those things. Define humility, and what is true humility, as opposed to pseudo humility. David, right. It depends what you mean. David's question is, how would you see those working in libraries, information, knowledge and data with no professional qualifications? It depends what you mean by professional qualifications. I think the issue is if you are prepared to embrace and sign up to professional values and professional ethics and adhere to professional standards of behavior, then you are professional. That would be my definition. I think where we're at in terms of our CILIP journey is we looked at the ethical framework, and we're starting to think about the values that we hold as a professional group. I think we now have to take the next step, which is more difficult in some ways, which is finding professional standards and behaviors, because we can only measure whether we're meeting those standards if they're defined. And ethics and values tend to be more broader based, whereas we do need ourselves to think about, well, what are the standards? What are the behaviors we need to adopt to be seen by ourselves and others as professional? So thank you for that. The difficulties of this is that people can't come back to me, I please do if you would like to, and I'm happy to listen to someone. Hello, Stella. I do remember you, Stella. I saw your note earlier. I haven't time to type as well. And nice to see you, and thank you for the comment. Stella's also asked the question, how do we address the risk of talent leaving the profession? I.e., do and will those with current leadership traits and skills find more opportunities in other non-library sectors? This, I couldn't agree more, Stella, that they will, yes, they will find more opportunities potentially if we don't address the risk of talent leaving the profession. And I think the difficulty is, it's one of those, unfortunately, chicken and egg things. Where does it start? Because there are so few opportunities, and we're looking at rewards, aren't we? Rewards and recognition, particularly in certain sectors. That's going to be a huge difficulty, because people with talents may decide that they can't, sadly, afford to be within the profession. Lots of people make the trade-off between being professionally fulfilled against financially rewarded, and really that is always a danger. Plus there is also the danger that there aren't the professional opportunities that there once were. With the retrenchment, there is the huge difficulty of the issue of volunteers, how we look at volunteers and what we use volunteers for. Volunteers are never to be used as a substitute for the work of professionals. But on the other hand, I think it comes back to a more fundamental question, that what is it we mean by a library and a library service? That unfortunately, people who fund libraries tend to view them as warehouses full of stuff. That is what a library is. It's a warehouse full of stuff, whether it's a digital warehouse with digital stuff, or it's a physical warehouse with physical stuff. And that all you need is somebody who just hands it out and takes it back again, which you can use some volunteers to do that. The fact that where the stuff comes from, how it's evaluated for quality and so forth, the whole issue of what we mean by that is difficult. So, sorry, long-winded answer, Stella. Thank you. Joyce, how do you empower people? Oh, yes. To see themselves as leaders regardless of their professional level, when historically you would look at, we look at a leader as someone with a senior role. I think that's because we have to divorce the idea of leadership from position and hierarchy. That when we think about it, there are lots of leaders that we look to. People talk about thought leadership, which I don't actually like as a phrase, because it just makes it's one of those things that makes me cringe a little bit. But it's actually saying we can lead under certain circumstances and in certain times, that leadership isn't a role and a position we have all the time, that we lead according to necessity and context and requirement, that all of us here are perhaps leaders in differing ways. We may be leaders within a family context. We may be leaders within a social context, So it's actually divorcing this idea from leadership being related to hierarchical position, that it's about empowering people to encourage others, yes, and making leadership is about, well, there is the debate about leadership and followers, that if you are leading and no one is following, then what you are is a person walking by themselves. That's what you are. You're not a leader. You are just walking by yourself, which may be necessary sometimes. Okay, right. Stella again, many of my non-librarian friends question why I stick with libraries. Yes, it's also one of those things that all through my career, people have avoided categorizing themselves as libraries. They describe themselves as various other things. You know, it's one of those things when you go to a party or when you meet a new group of people, how do you describe who you are and what you are? And it's that sense of belonging. And we need to see it as a badge of pride. We need to see being an information professional, whether we describe ourselves as a librarian or as an information manager or a knowledge manager or whatever we want to, whatever badge we want to have, that we wear it with pride. Yes, that we have a sense of loyalty to it and a sense of belonging. Government consultation into professions, including chartered role. Yes, the government is always endlessly having consultations into the professions, because every time they run a consultation, they discover that the professions get more and more exclusive. They get more and more exclusive in terms of socioeconomic, demographic, and gender background.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather than less so. And that, you know, there are absolutely basic fundamentals, and some of which I don't feel that I am equipped to comment on, and that my colleagues who are leading on the equality, diversity, and inclusivity agendas for CILIP are much more knowledgeable about. But that the basic line is we need to have something that says being a professional is a set of behaviors and standards, and that it's not some kind of elitist exclusive club to which people cannot belong. It doesn't mean that we don't have certain things that we categorize as being central to being a professional, but that we use those to uphold the values and the ethics of a profession, not to use those as a means of excluding others, creating some kind of elusive club. I hope that was a good answer or a sufficient answer. It's a very difficult one. And Molly, how do you navigate the sometimes tricky relationship between a librarian and a superior who may not hold the same professional values? That's the difficult one. That comes down to communication and mutual respect. That it's about having a clear ability to communicate what our sense of professional values are. And that comes back, I hope, to what I was saying earlier, that we then have the very difficult task often as individuals of deciding where our primary allegiance lies. If there is a conflict between the organizational values and the professional values, where do we stand? And that's one of the reasons that we belong to a professional association, because we have support in upholding our professional standards and our professional values. I hope, Molly, that answers that. Christina, how would post-COVID-19 leaders adjust to the technical requirements for users? I think we can't all be IT specialists, but I think we need to have an appreciation and an understanding of what is necessary for us to undertake our role. And I think that comes back to something that I spent my entire working life espousing, and that is that it's about lifelong learning. That as a professional, you are committed to constantly refreshing your skills and your knowledge and your behaviors. That we can never sit back and think, well, we've learned everything we need to know now. that, you know, I've now got a badge that says I'm a professional librarian and that's it. I can just, you know, go and practice, because that's not what happens, is it? And we have to find a way of, you know, ensuring that those who would like to categorize themselves as a professional do so in a way by keeping themselves up to speed with the professional knowledge. And that's where using the PKSB, professional knowledge and skills base, as a tool comes in, that we should use it to inform ourselves as individuals of where we need to perhaps upskill, update our knowledge base, and what we think we are up to speed on. Okay, I don't have any more. I can't see any more. No more questions now.
I have one. I have one. Yes, you mentioned conflicts of loyalty in other parts of the world that you found puzzling. What can you name any British conflicts of loyalty that you've seen cause puzzlement elsewhere?
Not well. I think it's the reverse, actually, that that we tend to put work-based loyalty above everything. That, you know, we particularly things like family. You know, that's something that when I've been in the Middle East, particularly, this idea that your primary loyalty is to the wider family base, and that therefore, if you are needed to take care of a sick family member or do something as mundane as waiting for a plumber, you do that because that is what is needed for the family loyalty, and it's not perceived as unprofessional behaviour. Now, in the UK, it's possibly the reverse. we tend to put work-based loyalty above everything, you know, and you can read that people have gone into work, you know, on the day that they've lost a close family member, that sort of thing, which would be a complete puzzlement. It's a negative one, as it were, but that would be completely alien, you know, to people, to colleagues in the Middle East, and also colleagues in the Far East, you know, where that idea that there is a primacy. I think it's where your primary allegiance lies, and we often muddle. We're often not sure where it is actually in Britain, and we kind of muddle along, or we are contradictory. I don't want to make political points because I don't think that is my role, but there have been criticisms, shall we say, of behaviours of some of the leadership in the country as a whole, between what they are espousing, what they are saying, and what they're actually doing. And it's that gap that we need to avoid, that we say that these are our standards and our values and our behaviours, and then we are caught doing things like travelling when we have COVID, or going to an area that's in lockdown when it's we shouldn't do so. And when you're in a public role, you have to lead by example. Coming back to Christiana's point, you do have to lead by example. I think there's probably a work-life imbalance. We're not terribly good. We have that sort of work-life imbalance, which is not proven to be very good for us either, I think, health-wise. Oh, and another question. How many people are coming into training in the UK for the LIS profession? If the barrier is financial, should we return to BA entry rather than an MA? Well, in actual fact, as far as CILIP is concerned, there isn't a graduate entry requirement any longer. So it's not a requirement to have a master's. the MA requirement and the master's level requirement for professional practice is an American requirement. If you want to practice in the US or in an environment that adheres to US standards, such as international schools, for example, wherever they're based in the world, adhere to US standards of professional behavior and norms, you must have a master's degree in the subject. That is the US requirement. Otherwise, you are not considered to be a professional librarian. I wouldn't suggest that I adhere to that. The apprenticeship route, yes, sorry, and the screen's moving. Yes, the apprenticeship route, marvelous. I've been committed to all of these things throughout my entire career. We established, when I was at Aberystwyth, I got a research grant from the then Welsh office to set up an experiential learning entry point distance learning BA degree, which is still going at the moment, which meant that we recognise people who could come for entry onto the BA route and professional practice by recognising their professional practice, as it were. So yes, I think the apprenticeship route is an excellent development, and I hope it is successful. And Stella's right, you can study LIS at BA level. Very few are still in existence. Now I'm going to set myself up to be contradicted. I think there are only 2 or 3 left now that are library and information studies. There are digital heritage and cultural heritage and various things, but I don't think the only library and information studies one that I know of is still at Aberystwyth with the distance learning one. Joe, I would agree. Joe is saying that she's not chartered and feel this is something you need to do to progress. Yes, the concept of chartership is it's something that cuts across all different professions, so that people understand or think they understand what it means to be chartered, which is why we've had this huge influx of people from the knowledge management sector, because we have provided them with a route to be chartered, which means that they gain recognition within. We were talking earlier, well, I was talking earlier in response to a question about this recognition, this pull between professional and organizational loyalty. And one ways in which you achieve recognition for yourself as a professional is by acquiring chartered status. Other professionals understand it. For example, HR professionals do, because they have to be chartered. Yes, Chartered Institute. Yes, of it will come to me in some way, shape or form. Human resource professionals. Yes, they are. They have to be chartered. And similarly, pharmacists and so forth, if we're looking at the health sector, these multidisciplinary, multi-professional teams, they're recognized by the organization that says, well, I've got all these people who say that they're professionals, right, we'll recognize you if you have X, Y, and Z. Thank you, David. CIPD, yes, you're quite right. Yeah, HR people, yeah. CIPD, yes, which I should know, because I've done some work for CIPD, so I should know that, but yes. Thinking and responding and speaking at the same time are quite often difficult. We've only got 4 minutes, I think. So
I'd better wrap things up then. Right. Well, thank you very much, Judy. You've done us proud. That was an extremely pertinent talk and I'm glad it's been recorded. Chapter is not all that easy with Zoom, but it is possible. If people look at the bottom of the screen or pull the curtain to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a reactions button. And if you click on that, I'm clapping now. Look.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of all of you. And I'm sorry I couldn't see more of you and meet more of you and actually talk to more of you. I've got one or two people on video, but otherwise I've just got names and blanks. But thank you, and I really enjoyed being able to speak to you, because since I performed a professional function in February, and this is my first one since, and it's October, and I'm so pleased it's this group, because I think having a global perspective is just so important. So thank you all very much, and lovely to meet you. And I hope to see you all again, maybe at the CILIP conference next month, because I'll certainly be speaking there.
Thank you. Well,
Okay.
As many of us as can will be there. And I'd like, if I may, to flag up something else, which is that ILIG, we are most honoured that your first talk since February was to one of our informals. And I'd therefore better tell people what the next one will be. On Wednesday, the 18th of November, again at 6 o'clock, we have Ayub Khan and John Dolan with library tales from here and there. Yes, and
Yeah.
I'd better put in the chat. We for that event, as for this, we do need people to book in advance, and so now here we go. Here comes the place you can book, and I look forward. I'll leave that up for a few minutes, and yes, I hope everyone is able to book. I've put that on the chat. I hope everyone's able to book now. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
there we
My
are.
fault. Yeah.
It's there.
I failed to hit return.
Yeah.
Right,
I've
okay.
just coincidentally, whilst I'm talking to this group, I have done some work with Ayub and John. We were out in Bangladesh in 2018 doing something for Libraries Unlimited there together. So yes, that's why I smiled when I you said it was going to be Ayub and John. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it'd be interesting.
Well, thank you for this interesting one. I won't shut the meeting down. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll leave that up for until it's 7 o'clock, and people can click, and so everyone has time to click on it, and I'll shut the meeting down when my screen says 1900 and it's still saying 1859.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it there. And I'm not going to do cow impersonations as James Boswell did in a similar situation. I'll just leave it there. 1900.
Thank you all.
Yeah, it says 1900 now. So thanks again, Judy. Thanks again, everyone, for coming. I'd better shut the meeting down now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.